February 16th, 1962, just after 4 a.m. winds were blowing at around 35 miles per hour, nothing unusual for a British winter, but within 2 hours, everything changed. Gusts surged to nearly 97 miles per hour, powerful enough to bend metal cranes. Sheffield, a city that had endured the wartime blitz, was about to face what residents would later call its second blitz. For a few terrifying hours that Friday morning, Sheffield became something it had never been before. Nearly two-thirds of the city's homes were damaged. Entire streets of prefab houses were torn apart. 4 people lost their lives, not to bombs, but to their own chimneys crashing through their roofs. This wasn't just another storm. It was the Great Sheffield Gale, the most intense urban wind disaster ever recorded in Britain. The winter of 1962 had been calm and mild, quiet enough that people barely noticed the season. Across northern England, towns had already experienced strong winds earlier that week, but Sheffield remained untouched. There were no warnings, no signs of danger. The Pennines had always shielded the city. Nestled behind those hills, Sheffield usually avoided the worst storms. While Manchester and Liverpool were hammered by Atlantic gales, Sheffield stayed protected in its valley, or so everyone believed. That Friday morning, the hills became the enemy. The wind came from the west, as it always did, but this time, the atmosphere behaved differently. A temperature inversion formed, warm air trapped above colder air. When the wind struck the Pennines, instead of flowing smoothly over them, it rebounded, like a stone skipping across water. The air compressed, sped up, and was forced violently downward into Sheffield's valleys with hurricane-like force. This phenomenon is known as a lee wave, a rare and unpredictable atmospheric event that even meteorologists struggle to forecast. Just a few miles away, wind speeds were barely 18 miles per hour. Inside Sheffield, however, the Pennines acted like a ramp, accelerating winds to nearly 97 miles per hour, and it arrived without warning. At 4 a.m., most people were asleep. The wind felt strong, but not dangerous. By 6 a.m., roofs were being ripped away, chimneys collapsing, glass exploding into the streets. Families woke to a sound many hadn't heard since the war, a constant, violent roar. 17-year-old Jack Johnson was asleep in a Turcliffe when his chimney crashed through the roof. He didn't survive. Shirley Hill, the wife of Reverend Colin Hill of Brightside, was sitting in her armchair when bricks smashed through the ceiling above her. Ida Stubbs, 57, from Crooks, was killed in her bed when her chimney fell straight through the roof. 19-year-old Barl Dickinson from Birdwell in Barnsley died the same way. 4 lives lost, all caused by collapsing chimneys. By 8 a.m., Sheffield looked like it had been bombed once again. The prefab houses were hit first, built after the war as temporary homes meant to last just 5 years. Many were still standing 17 years later because Britain hadn't rebuilt fast enough. Now nature was finishing what the bombers had started in areas like Arbourthorne. Entire rows of prefabs were ripped apart, walls peeled away like cardboard. Roofs were lifted clean off and hurled into neighboring gardens. Families who had survived the Blitz watched their homes disintegrate in minutes. One entire street simply vanished. People stood in the wreckage holding whatever they had managed to save: a blanket, a kettle, a child. At Sky Edge, the devastation repeated itself. Prefabs shredded. Families suddenly homeless. Across the city, more than 100 homes were completely destroyed. Another 6,000 were left exposed. Roofs missing, windows smashed, walls cracked. Around 70,000 more suffered damage of some kind. In a single morning, nearly two-thirds of Sheffield's homes were affected. Even houses that had stood for over a century couldn't withstand the storm. Rows of Victorian terraces lost their chimneys, bricks crashing into bedrooms and streets as people tried to escape. Crooks, built high on Sheffield's hills, was battered badly. Residents were evacuated as buildings became too dangerous to enter, and through it all, the wind never stopped screaming. At Bramall Lane, home of Sheffield United, a floodlight pylon collapsed onto the pitch, tons of metal twisted and broken. The perimeter wall at the Shoreham Street end gave way. In the city centre, a tower crane at the College of Technology building site twisted around its scaffolding before crashing into the structure below. Witnesses said it looked as fragile as paper. Near Heeley railway station, Debris littered the tracks. A London to Sheffield train was approaching at speed. The driver spotted the danger just in time, stopping only meters short of catastrophe. Hundreds of lives were saved by seconds. Power lines fell across the city. Blackouts followed, no electricity, no heating. With roofs missing and windows blown out, families sat in darkness and cold, listening as the wind tore Sheffield apart. Emergency services were overwhelmed. Over 1,000 calls came in within hours, with another 1,000 waiting. Phone lines jammed. Switchboards failed. People desperate for help heard nothing but busy tones. Police and firefighters worked through flying debris, falling chimneys, shattered glass, and spinning roof tiles, pulling residents from wrecked homes and evacuating dangerous buildings. At Jessup Hospital for Women, the power failed. A 2-day-old baby lay in an incubator with no heat or electricity. Emergency generators were rushed in and temporary power connected. The baby survived just barely. By midday, the wind began to weaken. It didn't stop, it slowed. The damage was already done. Sheffield began to take stock. The government declared a state of emergency. Sheffield was officially designated a disaster area, the first British city to receive that status due to wind damage. Hotel owners as far away as Blackpool, Cleethorpes, and Morecambe offered rooms to displaced families. In Sheffield, schools and churches became shelters. Hurlfield Secondary School alone took in over 120 people. Families arrived with whatever they had managed to save: a bag of clothes, a blanket, sometimes nothing at all. Mrs. Ethel Hallam from Errington Avenue arrived with her 15-year-old daughter Pamela and their dog, Rover. Everything they owned fit into 2 bags. The Lord Mayor launched a relief fund, raising £8,500 within days. Businesses donated generously. The Home Secretary, R.A. Butler, wrote to say he was horrified by the scale of destruction, but proud of Sheffield's response. But money wasn't enough. The city needed workers. Builders were brought in from Birmingham and Coventry, housed at Endcliffe Drill Hall and RAF Norton. Hundreds worked around the clock, patching roofs and boarding windows before the rain arrived. Forecasts warned of more wind and heavy rain, and with 6,000 homes already leaking, time was running out. Insurance offices saw queues stretching down the street. Sheffield alone filed 50,000 claims. The estimated cost reached nearly £3 million, over £150 million in today's money. And that was only Sheffield. Worse still, half of the damaged homes weren't insured for storm damage. Council-owned properties. The Sheffield Corporation had chosen to save on premiums and now faced a bill it couldn't afford. The government promised to match public donations pound for pound, but the burden still fell on the city, and Sheffield did what it always does: it carried on. Neighbours helped neighbours. Strangers shared tools, tarpaulins, and cups of tea. If your roof was intact, you opened your door. If you could swing a hammer, you got to work. By the end of February, emergency teams had dealt with over 2,200 dangerous buildings, securing chimneys, supporting walls, patching roofs. The repairs weren't permanent, but they kept out the rain. Then came March, the coldest March of the century. Snow, freezing temperatures, and families trying to stay warm in homes still scarred by the gale. And then Christmas 1962 brought the big freeze, snow from December 26th to March 2nd. 67 consecutive days. Sheffield, still rebuilding, buried once again. Slowly, painfully, the city recovered. Destroyed prefabs were replaced properly, chimneys rebuilt, roofs repaired. Life returned piece by piece. A storm like this is estimated to strike Sheffield once every 150 years. That means it could happen tomorrow or a century from now. Lee waves remain almost impossible to predict. What we do know is this: on February 16, 1962, Sheffield faced a disaster unlike anything Britain had ever seen from wind alone. 4 people died. Thousands were left homeless. 2/3 of the city was damaged. And yet, Sheffield did not break. Were you there that morning? Do you remember the wind, the destruction, or how the city came together? Share your story in the comments. And if this brought back memories, subscribe to keep these moments from history alive.